Shana Tova. Gamar Chatima Tova, may you be sealed for a good life. We welcome you on this evening of Kol Nidre, Erev Yom Kippur. Those of you who are with us in the sanctuary, we welcome you especially. Please continue to maintain social distance. As you see, we are not full, but we are joined through the internet to a much more extensive congregation and community. And we welcome all of those of you who are signed on to be part of this service as the walls of Sukkot Shalom open to embrace you who are here and those of you who are not here physically. Yom Kippur always is a time when we feel our own vulnerabilities, our own insecurities. It's a time when we cease from eating and drinking and the pleasures of the world. We had expected and hoped that this year, unlike last year, we would all be together. That back in even June, we thought with the vaccinations, although not for those younger than 12, but still that there would be enough universal vaccinations that we would all be healthy enough to be together in person. Well, we've been taught again our own vulnerabilities and imperfections, and we are very happy that we're still be able to be together, whether physically in person or those of you who are in your homes. And so we welcome this Yom Kippur together, realizing that we are a little more fragile than perhaps other years, that we seek the support of the divine as well as the support of each other as we welcome this Yom Kippur. So, those with prayer books, please turn to page 9. On page 9 at the top of the page, the human spirit is the lamp of God, searching out what lies within us. Guided by the flame of conscience, on this sacred night we search for truth. Shine your light upon us as we strive to serve you. May we find safety in your faithful love. We light the flame of healing and forgiveness. On this atonement night, we give thanks for love.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kinshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik neh shel Yom HaKippurim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehechianu v'kimanu v'higianu lazman hazeh.
We continue on page 15 as we prepare ourselves for hearing of Kol Nidre. Kol Nidre, a chant that begins in a whisper and rises to a cry. On this night of promises remembered, each soul is solitude, communes with the soul of the universe. God, from this day of atonement to the next, may we reach it in peace. All Israel makes these vows: to turn from wrong, dishonesty, and greed, to walk in the path of justice and right. Yet we know our weakness, how prone we are to fail. Help us to keep our word. Help us to act with humility and integrity. We seek pardon and forgiveness. We seek your radiance and light. We hear the haunting sounds of Kol Nidre in this cello piece. We are blessed to have Jan Nedvetsky playing the cello for us on this evening. truly a remarkable talent that we are so blessed to have part of our Sukkot Shalom family. We turn to page 16. If you're comfortable standing, please rise.
Or zaru ala tzadik ul yishrei lev simcha. Or zaru ala tzadik ul yishrei lev simcha.
At the bottom of page 18, let us read together. All vows, resolves, and commitments, vows of abstinence and terms of obligation, sworn promises and oaths of dedication, that we promise and swear to God and take upon ourselves from this day of atonement until next day of atonement. May it find us well. We regret them, and for all of them we repent. Let all of them be discarded and forgiven, abolished and undone. They are not valid and they are not binding. Our vows shall not be vows, our resolves shall not be resolves, and our oaths, they shall not be oaths.
Kol Nidre Services Vecharamei Vekonamei Vechinuye Vekinusei Kol sharan shvikin shvitin eterin umbutalin la sheririn la sheririn la sheririn velo kayamin nidrana nidrana lo nidre ve'esarana lo esare Ushwata la Shavot.
Please turn to page 22 for the Baruch Hu.
Baruch Hu et Adonai hamevorach Baruch Adonai hamevorach leolam vaed.
Please be seated. As we thank God for bringing on the evening, God's love for us, God's love for all humanity and the world, we are aware of a connection, of oneness between all of us, and the oneness of the eternal. For the motif, the word that keeps repeating, is one, unity, being alone, but also being part of something much bigger, being embraced, buoyed up, feeling surrounded by that oneness of the world. On page 28, we join in the Shema.
Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Vaed.
We turn to page 31, the bottom of the page. Listen, all you who wrestle with your fate, the intimate and the infinite are one. Trust that unity with your whole heart, doubt and all, with your whole soul and with all the powers at your command. Remember it, repeat it everywhere, working or resting, sitting or walking, night and morning, alone and to all you love. See it written on your hand, on your brow, in every common place and in every face. On page 40, as we join together in the Song of the Sea as the children of Israel left Egypt in slavery and tasted their first taste of freedom. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, who is like you among the gods.
Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha nedar b'kodesh, nora tehilot osefele, malchutecha ra'u vanecha, bokeach yam lifnei Moshe u'Miriam zeli, anu ve'ameru Adonai imloch le'olam va'ed.
Baruch atah Adonai ga'al Yisrael. Blessed are you in our lives, the Eternal One, who redeemed Israel. On page 42, in this Sukkot Shalom, as we ask God to spread over the entire world a Sukkot Shalom, a shelter of peace for us and all the world, for those within the walls of this sukkah and for those outside its walls, we ask for the spreading out of this shelter.
Baruch atah Adonai haborei Sukkot Shalom. Shalom aleinu ve'al kol amo Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai haborei Sukkot Shalom. Shalom aleinu ve'al kol amo Yisrael. Ve'al Yerushalayim ve'al kol amo. Ve'al Yerushalayim Shalom. Ve'al Yerushalayim ve'al kol amo. Ve'al Yerushalayim Shalom. Baruch atah Adonai haborei Sukkot Shalom. Shalom aleinu ve'al kol amo Yisrael. Shalom aleinu ve'al kol amo Yisrael.
We continue on page 46.
So beautiful to hear you all sing together. In the first blessing of the Amidah, Avot ve'imahot, God of all generations, on the holy days we add these special words. Zochrenu l'chayim, melech hafetz b'chayim, v'chotvenu b'sefer chachayim, lemancha Elohim chayim. The Hebrew word chayim, meaning life, repeats at the end of each of those phrases. Remember us for life, sovereign God who treasures life. Inscribe us in the book of life for your sake, God of life. We are taught during the holy days to choose life, to not take life for granted, to live a good life, a life of blessing and goodness, and to find meaning and purpose in our living. We pray tonight that we be remembered and inscribed in the book of life. Please rise in body and or spirit as we prepare ourselves for this moment of prayer, page 46.
Adonai sefatai tiftach ufi agid tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise.
Page 48.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, ve'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, ve'Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor ve'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, Vekoneh HaKol, Vezocher Chazdei Avot V'imachot, Umevi Geula Livnei V'neihem, Lema'an Shemo Be'ahava. Zochrenu lechaim, melech hafetz b'chaim, v'chotvenu b'sefer ha'chaim, leman ha'elohim chaim. Ozer Moshiach u'Magen, Baruch atah Adonai, Baruch hu Baruch Shemo, Magen Avraham ve'Ezrat Sarah. Amen.
You may be seated. We take a moment now for our own silent prayer, meditation, and reflection. Another addition is made to our Amidah and Kol Nidre. In our prayer for peace, Shalom Rav, there is yet another insert specifically for the High Holy Days. Once again, we pray that we may be remembered and inscribed in the book of life with a life of goodness, prosperity, and peace. The words of Shalom Rav, page 78.
Shalom Rav al Yisrael amcha tashim leolam. Shalom Rav al Yisrael amcha leolam. Ki atahu melech adon lechol ha'shalom. Atahu melech adon lechol ha-shalom v'tov beinecha levarech et amcha Yisrael bechol et uvchol shah bishlomecha.
Grant us peace, your most precious gift, O eternal source of peace, and give us the will to proclaim its message to all the peoples of the earth. Bless our country that it may always be a stronghold of peace and its advocate among the nations. May contentment reign within its borders, health and happiness within its homes. Strengthen the bonds of friendship among the inhabitants of all lands, and may the love of your name hallow every home and every heart.
Besefer Chaim beracha v'shalom, beracha v'shalom u'farnasa tova, beracha v'shalom, nizacher v'nikatev lefanecha, anachnu v'chol amcha bet Yisrael lechaim tovim ulshalom baruch atah Adonai oseh hashalom.
Tonight we offer our first communal confession, or vidui, of the High Holy Day season, an opportunity to stand as one community to confess our communal sins. In some ways, it may feel strange to stand together and recite the litany of sins aloud. And in other ways, it feels comforting, as it reminds us that we are all tied together as one. The Talmud teaches that the world and the individual is judged by its majority, whether we performed a majority of good or a majority of sins. When we do good, we tilt the balance, both personally and communally, to a scale of merit. Conversely, if one transgresses, we tilt the balance to a scale of liability. On one hand, it's freeing to know that we are judged by our majority. If we strive to do more good than bad, we are on the right path. And it also means that collectively, we are responsible for one another, meaning that the good we do in the world and the transgressions that we make affect us both as individuals and as a community. Tonight, we will join together to confess our communal sins and consider how we individually and collectively can tilt the balance of the scale toward good in the coming year. Please rise in body or spirit as we prepare for the Vidui Zuta, the communal short confession, page 82.
Ay, 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 Ashamnu,
Ashamnu,
Bagadnu,
Bagadnu,
Gazalnu,
Gazalnu,
דיברנו דופי.
דיברנו דופי.
איי 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 הבינו
הבינו
והרשנו
והרשנו
זדנו
זדנו
חמסנו
חמסנו
טפלנו שקר
טפנו שקר
איי 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 יצנו רע
יצנו רע
כי זבנו
כיסבנו
לצנו
לצנו
מרדנו
מרדנו
ניצנו
ניחצנו
שררנו
שררנו
אבינו
אבינו
פשענו
פשענו
צררנו
שררנו
כישינו עורף
כישינו עורף
איי 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 רשענו
רשענו
שיחתנו
שיחתנו
תייבנו
תייבנו
טעינו
טעינו
תיתנו
תיתנו
איי 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 איי.
We'll read together the bottom of page 82. Of these wrongs we are guilty. We betray, we steal, we scorn, we act perversely. We are cruel, we scheme, we are violent, we slander, we devise evil, we lie, we ridicule, we disobey. We abuse, we defy, we corrupt, we commit crimes. We are hostile, we are stubborn, we are immoral, we kill, we spoil, we go astray, we lead others astray. It's customary that we offer two confessions, the short vidui and the long vidui. Al chet shechatanu, we have sinned before you through failures of justice, integrity, and love. Please join me in reading on the top of page 91. We sin against you when we hurt one another. For our failures of love, Adonai, we seek forgiveness. For exploiting another for our own pleasure, and for the wounds we cause through betrayal and deception. For withholding affection from those we claim to love, and for using love for control our spouses and partners, our children and parents. For abandoning friends and siblings whose love has sustained us, and for neglecting those who love us when they need us most. For harboring in our relationships mistrust, boredom, and disloyalty, and for rejecting our partner's efforts at repair and renewal. For possessiveness, jealousy, avarice, and for lashing out in anger at those who are closest to us. Page 90, for all these failures of judgment and will, God of forgiveness, forgive us, pardon us, lead us to atonement.
ועל כולם אלוה סליחות, סלח לנו, מחל לנו, כפר לנו, ועל כולם אלוה סליחות, סלח לנו, סלח לנו, סלח לנו, מחל לנו, כפר לנו.
You may be seated. We pause now for our own moments of silent, personal confession. If you choose, you may use the words of the prayer book, pages 92 to 95.
Page 98 in your prayer books, the words of Shema Kol Nidre. Hear our call, Adonai. Shema ורחם עלינו, עלינו, וקבל ברחמים, ברחמים וברצון את השיבנו אדוני אליך, השיבנו אליך ונשובה, חדש ימינו, ימינו, כקדם. תשליכנו אל תשליכנו לזקנו ככלות Shema Koleinu Adonai Eloheinu Chus verachem Aleinu, Aleinu, v'kabe b'rachamim, b'rachamim,
We continue on page 112 as we turn to Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King, our Mother, our Queen, our ruler, our parent, the many aspects of the relationship in which we find ourselves standing before God. Before whom you stand. Know before whom you stand, to be able to stand before God. Avinu Malkeinu. Avinu Malkeinu, illumine for us the path of our life. How shall we find the strength to take the road less traveled by? How shall we come to know the purpose of our existence? How shall we learn not to live life in vain? How shall we get out of our own indifference? How shall we distinguish between truth and falsehood? How shall we find the answers to our questions? How shall we gird ourselves with strength and answers? If you all please rise, if you're able, rise in spirit as well, as we read together at the bottom of page 112. Avinu Malkeinu, be gracious to us, answer us, empower us, and give us courage. For the answers are both in you and with you. Continuing together, Avinu Malkeinu, Almighty and merciful, hear our voice. Avinu Malkeinu, we have strayed and sinned before you. Avinu Malkeinu, have compassion on us and on our families. Avinu Malkeinu, halt the onslaught of sickness, violence, and hunger. Avinu Malkeinu, halt the reign of those who cause pain and terror. Avinu Malkeinu, enter our names in the book of lives well lived. Avinu Malkeinu, renew for us a year of goodness. Avinu Malkeinu, let our hands overflow with your blessings. Avinu Malkeinu, let our eyes behold the dawn of redemption. Avinu Malkeinu, we pray, do not turn us away from you with nothing. Avinu Malkeinu, welcome our prayers with love, accept and embrace it. Avinu Malkeinu, act towards us as befits your name. Avinu Malkeinu, act for your sake, if not for ours. Avinu Malkeinu, you alone are our sovereign. Avinu Malkeinu, let the gates of heaven be opened to our prayer. Avinu Malkeinu, hear our voice. Treat us with tender compassion. Avinu Malkeinu, almighty and merciful, answer us with grace, for our deeds are wanting. Save us through the acts of justice and love.
Avinu Malkeinu, חוננו ועננו, כי אין בנו מעשים. עשה עמנו צדקה וחסד. עשה עמנו צדקה וחסד והושיענו. אבינו מלכנו, חוננו ועננו. אבינו מלכנו, חוננו ועננו, כי אין בנו מעשים.
Please be seated. Last week on Rosh Hashanah, I spent some time preparing before Unatana Tokef, sharing with you meditation, my own thoughts, my own interpretation of that very challenging prayer, the prayer that imagines God and a book of life, knowing who's to live and who's to die, who by fire, who by water, who by storm, who by hunger, who by famine, who by thirst. And I offered my own interpretation, largely rejecting that concept, that theology. I don't believe in an omnipotent, omniscient God who literally sits before a book of life and, like Santa Claus, lists who's been naughty and nice, determining each year who shall live and who shall die, who by fire or water, who by hunger or thirst. And I think I have taught my own interpretation over the years. If I wanted to try to define what that interpretation might be, it is a humanistic religious Judaism, a view of the divine that is not the omnipotent, omniscient God sitting on a throne in heaven. I have always rejected that concept of the God of Unatana Tokef. But this year, it became clear to me what some of the origins of my own personal philosophy and theology emanate from. On May 16th of this year, Rabbi Richard Rubenstein died at the age of 97. In certain ways, I considered Rabbi Rubenstein to be my childhood rabbi. I grew up in a conservative congregation in Pittsburgh, and Rabbi Rubenstein was the rabbi of Hillel for the University of Pittsburgh and for Carnegie Mellon. And at the time of High Holy Days, when the sanctuary at my congregation was filled to capacity, there was an overflow service that would take place either in the auditorium or in the social hall, and Rabbi Rubenstein was the overflow rabbi. Now, I always went to whatever service at which he was speaking. Rubenstein was fascinating, inspiring, dynamic, exacerbating, polarizing, provocative, but I can still remember some of his sermons and certainly his delivery. He was charismatic and brilliant. But he was most famous for a book he wrote in 1966 called After Auschwitz. And he became part of a group of theologians, largely Protestants, of the Death of God school. He was widely read and critiqued. He had achieved a certain degree of fame. Indeed, in 1967, he was subject to a Playboy interview. Now, this was wonderful for a 16-year-old boy because I had an excuse for saying that I was just reading the magazine for its articles. But Rubinstein was far too easily dismissed by this death of God concept. He was no atheist or non-believer. He believed in the death of the traditional understanding of God. He believed in the death of the God of the suburban Sunday school. He believed that the traditional understanding of a God who could intervene in history and in human affairs no longer made sense after the Holocaust. He rejected a supernatural God. He saw it as a pediatric version of God. He argued that the God of history, who was omnipotent or omniscient, could no longer be credible in a post-Holocaust world. This is what he wrote. When I say we live in the time of the death of God, I mean that the thread uniting God and humanity, heaven and earth, has been broken. After Auschwitz, the belief in a redeeming God who is active in history and who will redeem humanity from all evil is simply no longer possible. If there is a God who's able to act, who's able to redeem, who's able to save, but who chooses not to do so, one can no longer accept a God who would do that and who then would be worthy of worshiping. After Auschwitz, it was impossible to believe in a God who had the power to save, who had the power to rescue humanity from the evil of the Nazi death camps, or even from illness or floods or hunger or thirst, but who chooses not to do so. That is the God who was dead to Rubinstein. Rubinstein was a theological radical, even though he was an observant Jew for the rest of his life, and he was deeply politically conservative. But I was inspired by his rejection of the traditional concept of God. The idea of a God who does not act in history is not a late 20th century concept, however, in Judaism. I soon learned through my studies at Hebrew Union College, at the Hartman Institute, in studying Talmud, that this is a very old concept of a God who is limited in power. In the Talmud, one of the best-known stories comes from the tractate Bava Metzia 59 AB. It's a story of the oven of Achnai. Some of you may know it. It is a story about rabbis getting together and creating a law, halakha. What's kosher, what's not kosher, what's okay to be used, what's not okay. And this oven of Achnai was a simple stove oven made of tile with grouting in between. And as you know, when you have tile and the grouting, it can get dirty. And so the question that the rabbis were posing to themselves is, in this oven, if it gets unkosher, is it possible to keep using it if you can clean it? Is it possible to kosher the oven? Now, this is a pretty arcane dispute. This is not world-shattering. This is not the most important thing in the world. This is pots and pans, right? This is like checking on utensils. And yet the rabbis make a decision. Their decision is that the oven of Achnai is not kosher. But one rabbi, Eliezer, says, no, you're wrong. You're wrong. It can be made kosher. They said, well, we decided you're wrong. The halakha, the law, is according to our joint decision. Eliezer won't accept it. So Eliezer said, I'm right. And to prove I'm right, you see that carob tree outside? It's going to uproot itself and fly into the air. Sure enough, the carob tree uproots itself, flies up into the air, and we would call that either magic or a miracle. And the rabbis answer Eliezer and say, we don't make the law according to carob trees. So Eliezer says, but I'm right. And to prove it, the stream of water, the channel of water is going to reverse itself. This is before the Army Corps of Engineers reversed the Chicago River. That would be a miracle too. And the rabbis say, we don't make halachic decisions based on channels of water. Eliezer is very frustrated. He says, I'm right, and to prove it, the walls of this study hall are going to collapse on all of us. Rabbi Joshua gets up and says, stay out of it. We're making a decision according to a rabbinic court. Well, when Rabbi Joshua says, stay out of it, who is he talking to? He's talking to God. Eliezer then says, no, I'm still right. There's going to be a bat kol, a voice from heaven is going to come out and say that I'm right. Now remember last week, the voice from heaven that told Abraham not to sacrifice his son? Well, the voice of heaven comes out again and says, the halacha is always according to Eliezer. And Joshua quotes tomorrow's Torah portion from Deuteronomy, from Nitzavim. It says, Lo b'shamayim hi. It's not in heaven. They silence God. They say what goes on in our everyday life is really no concern of yours. We're judges. We're creating law. We're not waiting for revelation. That's not our goal. And so Joshua put God in God's place. And we're taught that God cannot intervene in everyday human affairs. Long before Richard Rubinstein. And in a larger sense, that is the whole rabbinic view of the world. It moves from a theocentric world, a God-centric world, to an anthrocentric world, a human-centric world. Rabbinic Judaism begins with the question of, what time is it? What time do we have to do things? Well, if you go to Genesis, we know when the day begins and when the day ends. The day begins at sunrise. It ends at sunset. That's Genesis. But that's not Rabbinic Judaism. That's not the Mishnah. When is the day begin? When you wake up. Some of us wake up at sunrise, but not all of us. And when does the day end? The day end when you drag yourself in from a late night party. And it may be 2 or 3 in the morning, but it's the previous day. Humans determine time according to the rabbis. It's not based on divine revelation or divine intervention. That is, I use the word carefully, modern Judaism, modern being 2,000 years old. God is not an active agent or presence in the world as we know it, and fires and floods, hurricanes and famine and droughts are not an act of God. We are responsible for the world in which we live. And so that's a core of what I believe. I've given you many hints over the years, I think, There are a few other beliefs that I've shared with you that I thought I would just summarize in this last Kol Nidre sermon of my rabbinate here. A few years ago, I talked about the heresy of narcissism. This core teaching of the Bible, particularly of the book of Exodus, is God saying, I'm God, you're not. That we are not God, that idol worship is making ourselves into the divine. Last week I talked about the God of relationship, of Buber's I and thou. I believe in the God of the metaphor, at least, of creation of Adam, of human, of Adam, from Adamah, from earth, earthling from earth, human from humus, and then the breath of the divine being breathed into that earth stuff, and then that is what animates us, and that is how we become containers of the divine. I believe in what's called predicate theology. Not who is God or what is God, but when is God. God is not good or merciful or loving. Goodness is godly. Mercy and love are godly. I believe in the unseen God of wind and love. The breath of God coming out of the burning bush, saying that God's proper name was Yud, He, Vav, He, but not pronounced, more like That's the theology that I understand. And that is the theology for me that connects me to a larger, more lasting, more eternal existence. All of that is the breath of the divine. But Rubinstein's favorite metaphor was the ocean. Rubinstein said, God is the ocean, and we are the waves. In some sense, each wave has its moment in which it is indistinguishable as a somewhat separate entity. But nevertheless, no wave is entirely distinct from the ocean. The waves are surface manifestations of the ocean, even as our knowledge of the ocean is largely dependent on the way it manifests itself in the waves. That's Rubinstein's theology. You might recognize it as something that it was in the very popular book by Mitch Albom, Tuesdays with Morrie. It's repeated there in the narrative. As Morrie is dying, he tells the story of the wave looking out at the shore and realizing that it is going to die when it hits the shore. And then the waves behind that wave say, don't be silly, you're not a wave, you're the ocean. And that's who we are. We make the very most of our brief existence as separate individual waves. But we also know ultimately that we are part of a much greater whole, the ocean. It is not an act of death, but one of becoming one with God. And that is the oneness which we repeat every time we get together and pray with the Shema. And that is how I see my own humanity and my connection with the divine and the sacred. It is the source of feeling blessed. To be a part of something that is much larger than oneself, that lasts longer than each of our own individual lives, that finds the sacred in each encounter with each other, and that celebrates life as the greatest gift we receive from the divine. And let us live this next year aware of that gift and grateful for that blessing. Shana Tova.
From a distance, the world looks blue and green, and the snow-capped mountains white. From a distance, the ocean meets the stream, and the eagle takes to flight. From a distance, there is harmony, and it echoes through the land. It's the voice of hope, it's the voice of peace, it's the voice of every man. From a distance, we all have enough, and no one is in need. And there are no guns, no bombs, and no disease, no hungry mouths to feed. From a distance, we are instruments marching in a common band, playing songs of hope, playing songs of peace. They are songs of every man. God is watching us, God is watching us, God is watching us from a distance. From a distance, you look like my friend, even though we are at war. From a distance, I just can't comprehend what all this fighting's for. From a distance, there is harmony, and it echoes through the land. It's the hope of hopes, it's the love of loves, it's the heart of every man. God is watching us, God is watching us, God is watching us from a distance.
Just a couple announcements. Tomorrow morning, we will meet back here at 10. We will be online at 10 o'clock as well. Unlike last week, where the perfect cue of 2 p.m. in the afternoon opened up the heavens, we are assuming that we will be able to be at Wallace Bowl for the intergenerational service tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock. At 3 o'clock, online, memorial names will be read online. At 4 o'clock, the Yisker and the Ela service will take place at Wallace Bowl outside. It will not be live streamed. There will be a service online at 4 o'clock as well. We will be having a service that is online at 4 o'clock tomorrow. It will not be the live stream of the service taking place at Wallace Bowl, but they'll be both running at the same time. So you can access service tomorrow afternoon either way. I hope that's all clear. It has been a great challenge. And I have to say that I am deeply grateful for Andy, Seth, for Rabbi Daniels, for Kenny, for being able to create and respond to the challenges throughout this year, but particularly for the High Holy Days. We turn to page 121 as we prepare for the reading of the Mourner's Kaddish. Our thoughts turn to all of our loved ones whom death has recently taken from us in recent days, and those who died at the season in years past. Our hearts open as well to the wider circles of loss in our community and wherever grief touches the human family. Zichronam livracha, may all of their memories be a blessing in this new year and always. On page 122, if you're comfortable standing or standing in spirit, we rise for the Mourner's Kaddish. Yikadal v'kadash shemei Rabbah, Bialma divrach rutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon u'v'yomechon v'chayei decho Beit Yisrael, b'gala u'v'zman kari v'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevorach le'olam olmei almaya, yiparach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnasei, v'tadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalau, shemei dekudusha b'richu, le'la u'le'ela, Mikol birchata v'shirata, shushbachata v'nechamata, da'miram bi'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mramav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael, kol yoshvei tevel v'imru amen. May the source of peace grant peace to all who mourn, comfort to all who are bereaved. Amen.
Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imeru amen.
We turn to page 127 at the bottom of the page. Yehi ratzon milfanecha Adonai Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu, shetachadesh aleinu shana tova u'mituka.
Our God and God of our ancestors, eternal God of all generations, may your presence in our lives this new year renew our spirits and renew our strength. May it be a good year. May it be a sweet year.
L'shana tova tikatevu tekatemu. May you be inscribed and sealed for a good year. Shana tova.
Shana tova. Before anyone moves, we're going to ask that you stay in your seats, and you're also going to leave your books in place, and the ushers are going to help everyone leave row by row. So just wait till you're dismissed by an usher and leave your books in your seat. Shana tova.
I think we're
Gamar chatima.
the back rows first.
Tova.
The back rows are going out first, and then slowly we'll have the other rows. Shana tova.